Dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends, welcome to the Rolex Learning Center. My name is Jean-Pierre Hubot. I'm the academic director of the Center for Digital Trust. And welcome to this exceptional event, this panel featuring Chelsea Manning, our Carmela Troncoso, and moderated by Daniel Saraga. So one word maybe about C4DT, the Center for Digital Trust. C4DT is EPFL's response to the challenge of digital trust, to all the things we know are happening over the internet. And the center is actually comprised of 35 EPFL labs. It actually also benefits from the support of 14 external organizations, many of which are represented in the room today. Most of them are companies. And since last year, the center has a special impetus around startups. So we now have 8 of these startups in the program. And one of them is actually NEEM, the one at which Chelsea Manning is working. So welcome, and this event is co-organized with the Trust Valley, an organization with which we work hand in hand on a number of occasions, especially to organize high-tier events such as this one. So it is my pleasure to call on stage Lenny Pedron, the exec director of the Trust Valley, who is going to say also a few words. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I am the director of the Trust Valley, a public-private partnership, and we are in the heart of the Trust Valley here at EPFL. EPFL is one of our founders as a state of Geneva and state of Vaud. In a very short while, cyberspace has become an integral part of our future security and prosperity. The scale and speed of this change has produced complexity, instability, and risk. The past year has seen cyber attack on hospitals, oil pipelines, schools, businesses, and commercial spyware used to target activists, journalists, and politicians. The transnational nature of cyberspace means these challenges cannot be addressed without international cooperation, but it is also an important arena of systemic competition and the clash of competing interest, value, and vision of our global future. The journey to better cybersecurity and digital trust has never been more challenging, and we are at its genesis. Today, we are witnessing the rise of a fast-moving world. We started our acceleration program with a little number of startups in data and privacy expertise, including Name Technology, which raised more than 43 million in the past year. We have doubled the number of the startups in this field since then. It is happening now and here. This is why today we have the privilege to have Chelsea Manning and Carmela Troncoso, Professor EPFL, joining us to discuss the future of data and privacy in wartime. Thank you, Chelsea and Carmela, for joining us.
Good afternoon to all. Many says that data is the new oil, so it's a resource with immense power, but I guess it's a bit more complicated than oil. You don't need only to extract it, you need to control it. It can backfire, it can pollute the environment, and it can be used as a weapon. So maybe a better metaphor would be data is the new uranium or plutonium. Great opportunities, but also some dangers ahead. I'm Daniel Saraga. I'm a technology and science journalist. I have the privilege to be hosting today's panel with 2 amazing panelists to address this issue around data and privacy. First, Miss Chelsea Manning, of course. She's known from... Well, she is known. She is known for being at the source of some of the WikiLeaks about the action of the US Army and during the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But she has a background in technology and has been warning about the danger of data collection, machine learning for many years now. And as we've heard, she's also now working for a startup in Neuchâtel called NIM, which has the goal of building an infrastructure for real privacy-preserving internet access. Our second panelist today is Professor Carmela Troncoso from EPFL. Applause. And indeed, she has played quite a role in your life, probably most of you, for the last few years, 2 years of the pandemic. She is one of the key person behind the Swiss COVID contact tracing app, Swiss COVID. She is one of the co-inventor of DP3G. That's the platform for building such privacy-preserving apps. She's very concerned by privacy. She's also been working with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. That's the organization that was behind these massive leaks about financial fraud and tax evasion called Panama Paper, Paradise Paper, and Pandora Papers. And so she's very much involved in protecting privacy. So I guess today the goal of this discussion is to get a few new perspectives beyond the hand-waving promises of tech evangelists, to have an honest look at what data is doing in our life, find a way maybe of producing, storing, analyzing, and sharing data that is being in a sustainable way, safe, ethical, controlled, and efficient. Okay, Carmela, Chelsea, nice to see you.
Bonsoir. Merci beaucoup.
In Spanish?
My Spanish has become very bad.
Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Okay.
nada.
I'm happy we're laughing because the first topic is not so nice. It is the elephant in the room, or if you allow me, the one bear in the wood. It's the sad situation of the war in Ukraine. And I'm really saddened to have to address this. I think we're all kind of down by this. I wanted to address this because many people are saying, well, this war is one of the first cyber war or war including data. And I wanted to ask, especially Chelsea, how you view it. Can data be stronger than a tank? Can data win or lose a war?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the significance of cyber security and cyber operations in the actual theater of a major conventional war, in this case the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, is not as significant as I think a lot of people hyped it up to be. So I think that while there was an initial use of a lot of different cyber attacks that were very specialized for like a military purpose, potentially. And then a lot of this is not even confirmed. Like, this is just what people think may have happened based upon events that transpired, and that is that certain communications methods seemed to be interfered with or interrupted. Certainly, the Russians were able to disable somehow, either through sabotage or through cyber operations, certain amounts of military infrastructure and communications infrastructure and things, and basically to sort of stagger or put Ukraine's defensive capabilities degraded by a certain amount. So in terms of actual effect in this, it lasted a few hours. Could be corrected. It was able to be rectified. Obviously, these are critical hours. So that, this is one of the reasons why I suspect. Apart from just being flat-footed in general, why Ukraine did so poorly in the initial part of the invasion. They were caught very flat-footed. I think the first 12 to 18 hours, Russia had had a huge advantage in terms of advancing, particularly on Kyiv and Kharkiv. They managed to gain a lot of ground in a very short period of time. Whether or not cyber operations had a role to play in that or not is unclear, but it's possible. But as soon as the lines of the battle started to form and Ukraine started to put up a defense, the effectiveness and the significance of this degraded and went away over time. I do find it more interesting. That sort of like undercuts what a lot of people fear. Like, oh yeah, if we're going to have a cyber war and it's going to change the entire landscape and the battle space. I don't think that that's happened here. But I do think it is interesting that how significant the misinformation and disinformation played in the run-up to, in particular, of the invasion in terms of preventing people from thinking that such an invasion would occur. And I think that it is very significant in sort of the symbolic actions that we've seen from third parties, unidentified third parties, groups of people who we're not entirely sure who they are. Some people claim to be activist groups. Some people claim could be foreign intelligence agencies that are not participants in the ground war itself. Symbolic things like the taking down of television stations, or changing of the information being portrayed on television screens in Russia and things like that. So I think that there's certainly a lot more to be said about the the misinformation, disinformation, and sort of the symbolic measures, the things that don't necessarily have an impact on the ground operations, but have shaped the environment and the world and how the world perceives what is going on, and how they discuss what is going on, and how they understand what's going on.
That's an interesting point, because one thing is what is happening in the military field, and the other is let's say, propaganda and opinion.
Right.
And I was raised up with this idea that an image could change the war. There is very sad images that we have in our head about the Vietnam Wars and stuff like this. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it has an importance, but usually communication specialists say, a story is much more powerful than a data point. And in terms of propaganda, stories, so access to channels are important. But in terms of data, have you seen, so really hardcore data, names, data points, have you seen anything going on there where data could be used or could be changed or could sway the war?
Yeah, I think especially in the first week, we saw a lot of media interest, a lot of online social media activity, spreading of stories that weren't necessarily true or accurate, but could be constructed very quickly in defense and a sort of propaganda for Ukraine, and sort of energizing people, getting people riled up and going against Russia and things. I think that a lot of these stories, while they're not as significant in terms of like how things played out on the ground, they absolutely had a tremendous impact on how people perceived these things. Some of the more apocryphal stories, for instance, or some of the things that were rumors or stories, I think had a significant impact and had, sort of a very deep and emotional impact on the entire world, not just the Western world, but on everybody. Really, I think even Russians themselves were sort of impacted by this before they lost access to a lot of their information. So yeah, I think that those kinds of stories and images have a significant impact. Now then, the truth and the on the ground information, it comes in a little bit more slowly than that sort of viral storyline that comes out. And even though it may line up somewhat with sort of some of the stories that we've seen, in terms of especially how poorly after the initial advance, Russia has sort of stalemated and been stalled due to logistical problems and fierce resistance by Ukraine. But in gathering that kind of information on the ground, I think it is significant that while that stuff doesn't really make it into the news as much, it's more of sort of data analysis and people who pay attention to this sort of open source intelligence information. I do find it interesting that the open source intelligence that's available in the Ukraine or in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the current one that's ongoing, I do find it significant that I have access to more information and more knowledge and sort of more on-the-ground information sitting at my personal laptop than I did working in Iraq in 2010. I think that's very significant. I'm shocked at just how much I'm able to sort of figure out about what's going on the ground from my own home or from my hotel room. So
if I understand you correctly, you're saying that open source intelligence, or basically citizen reporters or just informers, are doing more significant work than army analysts or.
Well, then we could 10 years ago. Like
okay.
It has surpassed the ability of what we were able to do 10 years ago, which says a lot about just how awash with information we're in. We're just drowning in information. There's so much information. Whereas before we had sort of a lack of information often. Like we are now so awash in it that it's like overwhelming our senses and our ability to even figure out what's going on.
I think today I've heard about something that would be probably unprecedented, that Russia could cut itself from the global internet. For two reasons. One, Cogent Telecommunication, which is one of the provider of the backbone of the internet, so really the big fat cable that really connects countries, has said we just cut ties with our Russian clients. And in summer last year, people said, well, Russia has made a test to cut itself from the internet for like a month or a few weeks, and it worked. So we could have this, I think, unprecedented situation where a country cut itself from the internet. Have you had thought about it? What does it mean? It means they're more isolated, the people will be even less informed in Russia, which is a big problem, but we will be less invaded by disinformation and troll armies.
Yeah.
So have you, both of you, have you thought about it? What does it mean for a country to be outside of the internet and international internet?
Yeah, so I think this is actually this happened recently in a completely separate incident where Tonga, this island nation, had a volcanic eruption that occurred in the Pacific nearby, and with the Hunga Tonga volcanic eruption, and this volcanic eruption disabled their ability to communicate with the outside world. So for about 3 or 4 days, all that the world could see was images from space of the eruption, which was this gigantic, huge plume of this gigantic mushroom cloud that could be seen from space, and sort of you could see the clouds and see what's there, but very little information was occurring on the ground, very little communication. So there was a cutoff of communication from the outside world. Nobody knew what was going on, rumors and speculation, and just sort of like, it even, I feel like that even the sympathies of people sort of being concerned because there was no imagery because there was no, like, we've become so dependent and so used to having a lot of social media information made available to us that people didn't really know what was happening, so they just didn't even talk about it. So there wasn't like a campaign to like, get people to raise money for victims or anything like that, because we didn't know how many people were affected. We didn't know whether or not many of the structures on the island were still standing, whether or not the tsunami had hit in a significant way, whether or not there was any loss of life, whether or not there was any survivors. So little information was coming through, and even radio communications for a period of time couldn't come through. So I think that Russia is could find itself in a very similar situation where, in a world in which we expect to have our information instantaneously and we get used to it, if we don't have pictures of a protest, did it really happen? You know, if we don't have viral images or videos of police officers beating a protester, does it? You know, is that something that people are going to talk about? You know, if they can't see it. And I think that these are things that that alarm me about these kinds of things.
So here it is one of the sanctions of the West, but it might isolate even further the people inside and deprive them of information. And so it's a very tricky situation and evolvement.
Yes, Chelsea was saying before, right? Disinformation and misinformation is very important. And when we cut any other possible sources to corroborate information, we're just letting the bubble kind of exist in itself, which can create huge problems. And also we have no warranty, you said before, that the information comes out. I mean, they can still come out through other channels, like this radio, satellite, like we could have ways of them kind of projecting images. And by cutting the main ways of communicating, we just lose all the second voices and third voices, which actually can become very important as given the images, as Chelsea was saying before.
Is it maybe a wake-up call that we've relied so much on the internet, we've put all our eggs in the same basket, and we're kind of neglecting the other channels for communication? Because then, if Russia really gets disconnected, it's really hard to reach the people inside. So we have to go back to radio and FM and AM and letters and I don't know what. I'd like to touch another topic, which is leaks. Both of you are involved with leaks. Chelsea, obviously, from a few years ago, and Carmela, you've been working with the consortium of investigative journalists who are dealing with financial leaks. And for me, leaks is a really tricky thing because it's transparency, it's great, but it's also against the law. It's a phenomenon that is hard to grasp, I think. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to address there. The first of all is again, the war. A couple of days ago, Ukrainian newspaper leaked the personal details of 120,000 Russian soldiers. People are not really sure what the data is. Is it good? Is it old? It's unclear, but it is something. And I wanted to ask you, Chelsea, how do you feel about this? Because you've been involved with leaks about army information, and here we tend to say, oh, great, maybe it's going to sway the war. Maybe the mothers of the soldiers will demonstrate. I don't know. We have hope that it could have a positive impact, but is it okay? Is it?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's a good question. The answer is I don't know. One of the things that I think is a problem with any sort of wartime situation is that a lot of things that are socially unacceptable become necessary. So from the perspective of if you view them as an enemy, you know, there are different rules that apply to a group of people, right? So it depends on where you stand in that, in terms of like where you are with the debate. Now, then, if you are the family member of a service member in Russia, you are obviously maybe not happy about this, and you feel uncomfortable about this, but you're also, you know, what impact does it have on you? But if you're in Ukraine, you're like, of course, they've been conscripted or they've signed up to be a participant in war, and therefore it is fair game to attack them personally, just as if you were attacking them personally in the battle space in the war itself. I don't have an answer because I don't think that's my call. Like I just, you know, it is a blurry and messy area because it is a war, right? You know, and different people are going to have much more extreme and extraordinary views on this because it involves such a massive military operation occurring on the ground.
How could it be impactful on the war to have the names of these hundreds of thousand soldiers? What could it change?
I don't know. I personally don't know. But you know, so definitely that kind of information can be used. Is that of interest in the public interest is, I think, a question that I would try to analyze it through. And the answer is I don't think so. I think that the question is it of military use, you know? as an enemy or as a combatant, like is this information fair game? And I think that's a very different question than is this information in the public interest? I don't think it's necessarily in the public interest.
Yeah, and I think so Chelsea has touched on 2 points. One is what would be the impact of this and whether we cannot predict, which is also what you're asking, like what is the good or the bad impact, right? We don't really know what would happen to these soldiers and does it have an impact for them or their families and how does this, so it may be actually work very well as a military tool, even as a kind of scare action or something like that, but we don't really know, and this we can kind of try to transcribe it at what happens when it is our data that is actually revealed, right? When there's big bulk of data, what happens next? But I think the other thing that we can discuss about is what is acceptable or not acceptable. And a lot of the situations you said before, like is it acceptable to cut the whole internet of a country? Is it acceptable to cut this big cable? Because on the one hand, yes, you may interrupt their military operations, but as we said before, you also have a negative impact of preventing information from arriving. Is it acceptable that Google and Apple decide which apps are they going to allow now in the Russian market or not? What is acceptable or not acceptable? And these things kind of change a little bit in war and non-war, but also I think they change a little bit as we move more and more into the cyberspace in which we depend from these very big companies, very places, right? Right now we gave 3 examples, Google, Apple, and the company of the big cable. I don't remember the name you said before, but they have made decisions that can actually change the future of the planet. And whether this is acceptable or not, both the decision and the fact that they are the CEOs of these companies making this decision is something that maybe as a society we should talk more about.
So you mean, is it okay that we're so dependent on private companies that basically they call the shots as much as politicians?
Yes. And what does that mean? Is it something, yeah, they have created infrastructure, which kind of leads back to this idea that we had in the beginning, where we were speaking about the new infrastructure that, for instance, NIM is creating, which is trying to be kind of much more independent, but not having kind of one node that makes decisions, right? And where do we want to go in terms of what industry or what kind of infrastructure we want to depend on when moments of crisis comes like now? Who should make the shots, as you say? And is there a problem with big companies or our dependency? And how should we react to this thinking kind of even beyond the word of the power that we have provided to these people?
Okay, we'll touch on this in the second part, because it's a big topic. Also, with the efforts of NIM, trying to be more decentralized and more kind of... I wanted to go back to the leaks. I talked to people from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, so the guys behind the Panama paper, Pandora paper. There's millions of documents which they spend months to edit. And I asked them, so you're the new WikiLeaks? And they were like, yeah, well, but no, we're not like WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks didn't really do this work of redacting things and really carefully looking through the documents and made more like a kind of dump, like published much more. And I wanted to ask you, in a way, what also you, Chelsea, and also you, Carmela, there's one thing to leak, so you have the stuff and you decide to give it to somebody, and then there is the somebody you gave it to. And what do they do with that? And how can they deal with the responsibility of having this data and deciding what to do with it? Redacting, spending months checking that the names are blacked out, or just sending all the data to journalists. How can we find a way to deal with this responsibility?
That's a very good question. And I just take things from the perspective of information is eventually going to get out. It is eventually going to be out there. And some information needs to get out there. And some information needs to get out there sooner rather than later. So it's a balancing act. It's sort of like what information is valuable and how valuable is it and how quickly can you get it out there is, I think, a different question. And I think I think that it's always going to be, like, in the military in particular, you sort of like view these things through what is through contingencies. Like that's a very military sort of like mindset. Is like okay, like we know that in order for us to do X, Y, and Z, we need to plan and do an action. So we need to do a certain number of steps in order to effectively do an action. Now, in my own experience, like trying to do this thing in a very short period of time required a lot of corners to be cut in terms of like trying to get this information, put it onto a CD, like put it like how or whatever means that you're trying to put it on, and then try to get it to the next person, and have access to a media outlet. And in my own personal case, the New York Times or the Washington Post, and attempts to do that. And so you sort of like work with what you get and what you have, and I think that's changed over time. So it's gotten a lot easier to be able to, to be able to obtain information, to be able to share information. The security of that of the tools that we have changed as well. So like we are developing newer and better tools to be able to share information. And I think that these largely questions that I think are kind of old already. Like they're kind of out of date. I feel like I get asked a lot about these questions, and they're kind of obsolete in the fact that like we're just now so awash in information that it's not so much about whether information gets out or not. It's like how do we sift through it? How do we sort through it? How do we manage all of the information that we're collecting and dealing with it every day? Because all this stuff is going to get out there. We're just so awash in all this information. It's like, how do we present it? How do we handle it? How do we store it? How do we manage it? And those are all questions that I think that need to get answered and will be answered for us if we don't do it ourselves.
Maybe Carmela, can you tell us, the project you were working with?
To be honest, I'm not a journalist. I'm a professor in computer science. I also have never leaked documents myself, right? I just build the tools that help them manage this information in a better way. And just hearing you both, what comes to mind for me is that there were, as Chelsea said in the beginning, two very different situations. One situation in which it was important to make this information get out as fast as possible, while in general, the investigative, the ICAJ, the consortium of journalists, actually have the luxury in general of being able to sit and shift through this document to actually, as Chelsea said, portray it in a way and kind of tell a story out of it, which sometimes you may not have the time. And that is a little bit of the balance that needs to be done, I think, here, about how important speed also plays a role, right? In the kind of work that I have done with them, indeed, actually, speed played a very important role in the sense that they are not such in a hurry. So that also allowed us to build more privacy technologies for them that maybe may insert delays, but actually give them an advantage because they can gather more information in a better way. But that is because in their investigations, kind of time is not of the essence. The fact that the Panama Papers come on June or on December is not going to make a huge difference, while it may be the case that for some of the documents, actually immediacy, right, is really kind of at the key if you want to have the impact that you want to have. And I think this is like answering your question about how do we decide. There are many more factors that is this information relevant or not. It's also how much time do I have to actually go through them and the impact that they will have.
And that's sort of what we're starting to see in Ukraine, for instance, is we're seeing information come out so quickly. We're getting it so fast now because there's an immediacy. There's a public interest. There's a general interest in a lot of information from on the ground. The information there's disinformation actors and misinformation. People are sharing misinformation. They're trying to obtain this information and share this information as quickly as possible, often without the luxury of authenticating it, verifying it either. So I think that whenever it involves sort of a massive operational sort of reality on the ground where there's millions of people, being displaced and there are thousands of casualties every day. I think that I think that you're just dealing with a much more messy environment, just like with the current conflict that Russia started.
Maybe a last question about leaks and transparency, because I cannot get my head around it. I find paradoxes, because on the one hand, we tend to view leaks like good, unless you're from certain political parties and you want to protect the bankers. We tend to think, yeah, it's the bad guys, so this should be out. And if
it just strikes me, a lot of this stuff just strikes me as obsolete. Like these questions are very much like dated from like a time frame, like the 2000s and the 2010s. You know, it's like we're sort of like in a different era. We're in an era where there isn't really secrecy anymore. Now it's how are we prioritizing the information that we're awash in? Because now we have so much information. I mean, that's why I found, again, that's one of the things I find so striking about the operations that are occurring in Ukraine and the defense of Ukraine right now, where I know more than I knew then, you know, in a different situation, right? We're so awash in this information. It's how do we? It's not so much how do we, you know, what is and is not secret, because everything nothing is secret anymore. So now it's how do we prioritize this information? How do we manage this information? How do we store this information and whatnot? Because it's getting out there, no matter what you say or do.
So that's an interesting point, and I think it's around the corner. Like nothing is secret anymore, or nothing can be kept secret anymore for sure, because in a way you cannot avoid being hacked. I mean, you can hope you won't be hacked, but to really avoid being hacked is really, really difficult. So do we have...
That's not quite what I mean, but I mean, like, whenever it comes to things that are in the public interest, like when it comes to media discussions and things like that, like personal privacy is, I think, a very different question.
Okay. So there's been another leak which broke my heart. In January, the International Committee of Red Cross got hacked and lost 500,000 records of people who were in the system. So this really broke my heart, because one thing is to have a leak about powerful people, the people who hide the money in the Virgin Islands. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can live with that. And people like us, okay, if we get hacked, it's bad, I'll regret it, I think it's unfair, but I won't lose much. But these are the most vulnerable people. Like really, they are, and their personal details about the drama of their life, about the circumstances, why they're vulnerable, is out. And I was like, if this happens, then what should we do? I mean, this should not happen, really. Should not happen, something like this. So what should we do? Do we have to rethink, like, should we have less data? Should we have less database? What can we do to avoid such things? Because for me, it's terrible. It should never happen.
I think that this shows one of the real truths, which is indeed once we have the data in a place, we don't know how to secure it perfectly. Like Chelsea was saying, it will go public. You also said it right now, right? You cannot avoid being hacked. And indeed, it comes to maybe rethink a little bit how we build systems and how do we need to have all the data in one place? Do we need to have all the data for that long? It's very convenient, but then you really have to weigh this risk that you're not going to be able to hold the doors for very long. It may happen, and then you also need to take into account that maybe indeed for something that the people involved are not going to get so impacted, you may run that risk of convenience. Maybe for other cases, it is actually the case that we need to rethink how we design the infrastructure. Actually, my group also works with the Red Cross, in this case in a different project, for biometrics, where indeed kind of our goal is to not create a database of biometrics. We know this is very dangerous, especially because these are very vulnerable people, because finding them and biometric is something that they cannot change, right? It can create kind of problem forever for them. We know that when the Taliban entered in Iran this last time, the first thing they did is gather kind of databases of photos of refugees that now are very problematic because they can be targeted. So now we're trying to rethink with them, well, what are the benefits of putting biometrics, and can we enjoy some of these benefits while not putting this at risk? But this indeed entails, like in this case, a project that it probably will last for a year to just rethink a whole infrastructure, because none of the things that we create for commercial causes, which in general have a very different risk balance, because as you said, there's the risk of what happens if my face go out. Well, we have a lot of photos of me on the internet, right? Maybe that's not the main of the problem. But now when a refugee loses that photo, the risk is completely different, and therefore we may not be able to use the same security kind of technologies for this, and that's what is important to think beyond and to think of new ways of creating such technology.
It does remind me of a metaphor about the uranium. It's like, you know, with nuclear energy, some people say we shouldn't do it because it's just too dangerous, and some others says, come on, we take the risk, we'll manage. Is there a taboo? Is there like a no-go? Would you say, like, for instance, biometrics database should just never be done because if they're compromised, it's just too bad?
A centralized database?
Sorry?
A centralized database?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a centralized database of biometrics is bad.
So you would say...
With Chelsea.
You would say no. And
Just
Carmela,
inherently bad.
can you imagine, like, in the 10 seconds, a system to make it really secure?
Yeah, so the type of thing we're designing is a very decentralized system where there will never be a biometric, like biometric resides on cards, reside on individual devices, that of course they can be hacked, yeah? Because at the end of the day, we just said we cannot secure things. If you have your biometric on your phone, you're as secure as your phone is, and your phone is not the most secure thing you hold with yourself, let's put it this way. So now the question is, but when this gets hacked, my only biometric gets hacked, right? Not the whole list of all of, in the case of ICRC, it could be the whole list of refugees of a particular camp. So we're working into kind of pushing these kind of things to devices and decentralize to reduce the risk and to reduce the impact that any breach in the system could happen. And again, let me reemphasize that that means that we need to redesign and reconceptualize how we think about technology.
And how to back it up, because you're going to lose it, potentially.
We also have a part for that.
Okay, so you kind of said redesign the way we deal with technology, and this, for me, is the cue to talk about infrastructure, because we always talk about data and algorithm, in a way, and we rarely talk about the infrastructure, the big fat cable that can be listened to by the NSA, as we know from Snowden, or which can be cut to Russia.
Anybody can listen to it, honestly.
Yeah. And the
it's getting easier, cheaper too.
And the infrastructure, I guess that's what you're working on with NIM. Can you, in 45 seconds, explain what the goal of NIM is and how you go around it?
Sure. So NIM is takes this concept of your virtual private network, which is to try to shield your communications, so from point A to point B on the internet, usually.
So VPN.
Yeah. So if you think of a VPN, you're trying to shield your communications and make sure that those communications are encrypted. Now one of the things that happens is that there's traffic analysis, so you get a sort of topological view, a 50,000-foot view, which is the network administrator or an internet service provider or a government agency or some nefarious actor, whoever can observe communications on the network can see that there is communications between point A and point B. So Tor is a tool which anonymizes that information by making a series of hops and making it more complex, adding a lot more nodes on the network and sort of randomizing the nodes on the network. So that increases the level of security beyond a VPN. What NIM is designed to do is it is essentially doing what Tor does, but it is enveloping it in a shroud of encryption. So that way, anybody who sees everything, because eventually, if you could see all of the connections on a network, you can untangle who's talking to who, even with Tor, and sort of doing what is known as network traffic analysis and sort of untangling all of the different connections that have been made. It takes a little bit of time, but that amount of time is getting faster and faster and faster. So, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to do this. So more and more people and more potentially nefarious actors that you're trying to hide your communications from can observe this. Now, what NIM is designed to do is to make this even harder. And to provide the maximum amount of protection and the maximum amount of privacy and security on a network such as the internet that is available using the technology that we have in the next few years.
So the goal would be to have a really privacy-preserving browsing experience.
Right. So, and better than, because we are encountering a situation where all of the things that we do every day to protect ourselves and to shield ourselves from either surveillance or from being monitored or anything like that are slowly becoming obsolete. Because all of these methods of untangling and breaking into things are degrading over time. Because you're really buying. It's sort of like think of cryptography as a safe, right? Like you can break a safe. Like it doesn't mean that you can't get into it, but like they have an amount of time in which it takes to break that safe. But that amount of time with different methods, it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So we have to come up with more and more complex ways of building a safe.
Now, I want to ask a technical question, which is the kind of overhead. Meaning, I know Tor, I've tried it a couple of times. I won't say for what, sorry. And it's slow. It's slow.
Yes.
It's just slow. And so I think the NIM device protocol is working with blockchain.
It uses a ledger, so it uses a part of the NIM network uses blockchain. But it is, and I want to make this very clear, it is not a cryptocurrency. So
Okay,
it is built on the concept of blockchain, but the more important aspect is what's known as a mixnet, which is this randomization of how packets are flowing on the network, and those connections are not visible it is its own network within that's occurring on the network itself. But it's sort of monitored and observed in terms of like how much traffic is flowing and how much computational energy is being used by the ledger, the blockchain on the side.
So my question would be, what's the overhead in terms of technology, of energy, and of bandwidth? I mean, can you have what we are used to, like download a video, or is it like slow and it means it's only for niche applications?
Yeah, that's my whole job. Is I'm here to make it faster. I'm here to make it run faster and more efficiently. Because one of my concerns with this is that because it is more secure, you are also using up more energy, and we want to reduce the amount of energy that it uses. In order for you to be able to maintain your level of privacy. So what we're doing is we are trying to devise hardware that specializes in allowing the network to move faster on different nodes and sort of incentivize people to do this in a efficient and an energy efficient and an ecologically sound manner, unlike a Bitcoin miner who's just building a gigantic machine that sucks up all the energy and an entire power plant and tries to and generates an enormous amount of heat. So we have the opposite incentive. We're trying to make that we're going in the opposite direction of say a cryptocurrency, which is build bigger faster, and that is to build smaller and more agile.
Carmela, you
and then
also collaborate with NIM, right?
And
yes.
That's my whole deal. So.
And then I think that in this sense, like NIM is again kind of in this redesign of the technology, I think in a different way. So first of all, they are moving from this kind of generalized computing, which is what we're using normally, to think about how we can build actually hardware that allows us to do this faster so that we can reduce the consumption of energy and do this in a sustainable way. How I help them is more at the protocol layer. How can we design the packets that go on this network and the scheduling of these packets so that we can get the protection with the minimal amount of overhead possible. So I help them in analyzing the protection and then designing new ways of putting these packets there in such a way that we can actually do this, as you said, without it being so slow or without it creating an overhead that then users are not going to find actually appealing to have on their devices.
And that leads to my next question, is like, with state-of-the-art technology, often only few people use it. Only few people bother. Like we had encrypted email for decades, and nobody bothers. Because it's inconvenient, because it's complicated.
Right.
And so how do you plan at NIM to scale it up? I guess your goal is to scale it up, to get out of the niche applications for people who really have to hide something because they're doing shady stuff, but maybe for more people so that everyone could use it. How do you plan to scale it up?
Yeah, in the same way that everybody knows what a VPN is now. Make it easier. We make it easier and simpler. That way, you just download an app and it runs and it works. Like that's the goal. Is we just make it simpler. We make it easier. Because you shouldn't have to think about this stuff. This is for a technologist to think about.
We were actually talking about this at lunch, right? There are two parts. One is the final user, which is what you're saying. But the other thing about that we're building with NIM is an infrastructure. And the users don't use the infrastructure. The developers use the infrastructure. So the other step is to actually make NIM easy to integrate. One of the problems that, for instance, Tor has is that if you want to put it in one of your applications, you have to work a lot. You have to understand the technology. It's a very bulky thing. It is slow. It is not prepared to be integrated in other things. So one of the other goals is to really understand how NIM can be made such that for developers it's the same thing as just connecting to the internet. Create ways in that this becomes easier so that it's not the user the one that has to learn to use this complicated thing, but just the developer, and then it just becomes transparent to the user because NIM just comes integrated in whatever they're using, right? You install Twitter and then Twitter goes over NIM.
Well, I guess people who understand the necessity of privacy and security, are, the banks, the lawyers, they will be happy to have your technology. Now, the citizen, like me and I guess half of you guys, obviously we don't care so much about privacy. We put everything online, we don't encrypt our emails.
And that is the biggest lie ever told.
Sorry?
That is the biggest lie ever told. Are you agreeing?
I don't believe that.
Yeah, we don't believe that.
But I don't encrypt my emails. I put photos.
Right, but that's
on
our
Google,
fault.
on Google
That's
Cloud.
Technologist's fault. That's not your fault.
Yeah, but I mean, people I've heard from experts like you, it's tough.
It's not
Like you, they've heard that privacy is important. You shouldn't put photos
Yes.
of your kids on Facebook. You shouldn't put all your photos on Google because it's in the States and it might just.
Right, but
we don't care.
the problem
we just
is
do it. We click on the GDPR stuff for cookies like blindly. We
yeah.
never think. We just click. So
I
for
understand.
me, the question is, how do we bridge this gap? How do we convince people to really care about privacy? Or alternatively, Carmela, you've also worked at the COVID task force. Do you feel sometimes like an epidemiologist who keeps talking to politicians and they don't listen to them, or a climate scientist who say, come on, I've said it 100
All right.
times, you have to do something?
Okay, I'm ready to answer your question. I think that it's the responsibility of technologists. It's not your responsibility. It's not your fault that the privacy system is screwed up, right? That's the fact that we as technologists, and I say to we as in like not me personally, but like people who design and develop this technology have decided, oh yeah, you all are a commodity, and we need to gather as much information as we can as possible. So that's why we're focused on the infrastructure. We're not trying to tell you that you need to do this extra thing, that you need to do this extra thing, that you need a longer password, that you need to not use TikTok, that you need to not use Instagram. No, we're saying we need to completely rethink the way in which we design and develop all of these tools and applications in order to maximize your protection, in order to maximize your privacy, because as it stands, it's just you don't stand a chance.
So you're saying the technology must be privacy ready. The only option should be good technology.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, okay, yeah, it's interesting because usually, especially in Europe, we still believe in the state, the government. So we kind of pray
good luck.
that the government will come with a good regulation. And so far, regulation didn't do much. The GDPR is just this annoying pop-ups about.
Yeah, it tells you, oh yeah, you got a cookie.
And then
Do you want a cookie?
I always say no, and it just closes off the page, and I can't use the site.
So
and that is the problem, right? That your only choice is you either go and have it, or you don't have it. And Chelsea says it's not a problem of the users not wanting to do things. And this thing has become so pervasive in our lives that it's not anymore about me choosing, well, to maybe go online to buy a new jacket, right? It's actually, if I want to talk with my mom in Spain, I have to actually use the kind of tools that are available with the security and privacy that they give me. And my only choice as to whether I want to send my mom pictures, of my new baby or not, is I use WhatsApp or not, because she's not going to use anything else. right? And then I have to abide to that. And then there is a question, and you ask, like, as person on the task force, or when you see Swiss COVID, we really saw this in Swiss COVID. There is a thing that while people were extremely concerned about privacy, right? Privacy is the reason number 3, while people did not install the app because they were wary of privacy. But yet they didn't see any benefit of it. It's this app that you have in your pocket. It seems that it does nothing all the time, because most of the time, lucky you're not being infected, so the thing is not going to do anything. But then people would not use it. But all of the other apps that actually give you an immediate benefit and that are necessary, it's necessary for me now to have Twint to kind of interact in Switzerland in half of the places, because they don't use a card anymore, right? You use Twint or nothing. It's necessary for me to bank a banking application, because otherwise, if I don't have a double authentication system that has to go on my phone, I cannot pay. And all of these things kind of force me. And we're not talking anymore about, do I care about my privacy? It's, do I care about paying bills? And then it's very unfair to put on the users the burden of, well, users don't care, because I guess that everybody here cares a lot about their privacy in the sense that they tell different things to different people. The things I tell you are not the things that I tell Chelsea, not the things that I tell my students, not the things I tell my wife, right? We say different things. We are very careful of this. But when we move to the digital world, all of the choices that we have on the offline sphere, all of the choices that for years we have been developing to create our own selves, to self-determinate ourselves, are not possible anymore. So it's very unfair to actually kind of push this thing. And it's just a kind of a trick for many of these companies to say that the user does not care. Well, if you don't give a choice to the user, how do you know if they care or not?
Thank you. I feel better. I feel less guilty now.
Yeah, you are the product, and we trapped you. We got you. You're stuck. Got to get out now.
I'm the victim here.
He's the cookie.
Yeah.
Maybe about, do we have to change the way we view data? Because so far, what we do with the data, we just give it for free, essentially. We just don't care. It's just like, give me a free email address, I'll give you my data. Give me a convenient app, I'll give you my data, whatever. We just do it. I guess I thought about it. I guess there's just a few options. Another option is to hoard the data. You just say, no, it's mine. I use a camera which is not connected to the internet, and I keep my data. Maybe a third one would be to sell or to rent the data, to monetize it. And the fourth one, maybe to be actively controlling it. So between number 1 and number 2, so you really choose to whom you give your data or not. This kind of more conscious.
And number 5 is you have a technology that allows us to maybe send a photo somewhere without anybody knowing that you even sent a photo. And we know how to build those things. Now, those things are very hard to monetize, right? And very hard. But those things exist. Like, again, you're kind of ignoring the option that there could be another technological landscape in which maybe we don't need to make such a choice.
Okay, so we need another technology landscape, which means we need other companies. Because nowadays, basically, it's a couple of companies based in the US and probably soon in China, which decide what happens. Now, how can we find a way to get around them and to change the system? Because now they just vampirize everything. If you have a startup that is good, they just buy it and just either keep it, transform it, or throw it away. So they stifle innovation in a way. So how can we slowly find new room for a new kind of technology?
That's a very hard question. I mean, the first
Yeah,
one
this is a hard question. And I think one of the, there have been attempts made to try to make technology better. And I can think of, particularly with AI, right? Like I have 2 friends of mine who worked at they were a part of the ethics and AI division at Google, for instance. And they started to do their job, and they started producing reports. They started saying, hey, like, these are the things that at Google, and specifically Google, could be done better and could provide people with more protections and more privacy, or that could be more equitable for people, and that would take into account more things, because they're not very ethical and they're just sort of exploited. They're either being implemented too quickly, or they're not taking into account different factors about people, race, background, age, whatever, and they drew up these reports, and they said, hey, like, these are the things that need to change. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we didn't actually want you to do the job that we hired you to do. So you just wanted you to have a division that had that. So then they fired them. So that, like, yeah, that's a big problem. It's not an intractable problem, but it's one that I suggest. My suggestion is that what we really need is in the U.S. because unfortunately it's a very U.S.-based thing right now. Tech companies need to be unionized. That's the reality.
Here, I guess it was also a question of inclusion, like taking care of possible bias. So I wanted both of you to ask you to touch on this question. So basically all the algorithm, all the powerful machines we have, machine learning, AI, it feeds on the data. And I guess if the data is not good, the result won't be good. And so for the last 10 years, people were more and more worried about the fact that the data is not good. It's biased. It's mainly made with white males, and it excludes a lot of other actors of society. And how do you view this? How do you see hope? Obviously not, Chelsea, in the efforts of big tech to tackle the problem. So far, they've, I guess, not done such a great job.
No. They have deliberately done it that way. I want to be clear. This is not a mistake. These are features, not bugs, from the perspective of these companies.
So, okay, big tech, no hope from them. From what you're saying, how can we get around this? Do we have to have a better kind of code of conduct when we gather data instead of just saying, oh, well, I just gather as much data as I can because it's cheap. I'll just like monitor stuff and record, have sensors. And I have the impression now we're in this era where data is cheap. Just buy it and you don't think about the quality of the data. Should we change that? Should we have like audits about like a label? This data is good. It's organic. It's without pollutants. Like it's good data.
I think that there is the first kind of thinking error here is that it's all about the data. It's not only about the data. There is a pipeline. There is a collection. There is a processing, and all of it can introduce different biases. Also, how you use the data at the end. And a lot of these, I'm very surprised, right, because we have this conversation a lot about what we're going to do with all of these new technologies, but it turns out that for other disciplines, we have very good processes to do this thing, and one of them is medicine, right? The problem with technology is technology goes too fast, and apparently you just can't build something and put it out there without worrying about what damage is going to be or what kind of bias. When we develop a new medicine, pharmas are for years kind of going, actually checking that it doesn't have different effects. If it has different effects in different populations, they take care of that. And the reason here is like, why is technology so special that we kind of allow it to go in this speed? While we do have social and legal and organizational measures, because like pharma is kind of one of the biggest examples. Like even now, with the COVID pandemic, with the world kind of collapsing, we took a year to allow this vaccine to go out because it needed to be tested. We needed to make sure that before we impose this and we throw this on the population, while we don't do this with technology, and we have ways of actually check all of those things, just people don't do it, right? As Chelsea said, and maybe a feature, not a bug, because of the philosophy of build fast, break things, and but when you break things, sometimes you break people, and that's when these things kind of become
It's
more
interesting
important.
because it's, in a way, I touched about regulation, and it was in the sense of a blanket law, a law which says you need a pop-up for cookies, but I guess there's no general solution. You're talking about regulation like Swissmedic, like the European Medical Agency, so a regulator that looks at an algorithm, at an app, at a software, and says it's good or it's not good.
I mean, to be fair, I don't know enough about the pharma to know about how much of this is a regulation and how much all of this is just a process in which it's a given that socially, it's not socially acceptable to just test something on 3 rats and give it to kids, right? We have a full thing that you need to do before, while it's actually possible to just gather some data in a corner of somewhere, train an algorithm, put it on an app, and just use it on people. And this is the kind of thing that, I mean, I'm not very sure if it's regulation which should solve it, but it's maybe some other kind of, even kind of socially acceptable, and society saying, no, we need to have a different way. Technology cannot go so fast.
One of the things that I find striking about technologists, and particularly people that do data science and machine learning and have build these algorithms and applications that affect millions of people, whether it's determining your credit rating, like whether or not you're going to be able to travel, like whether or not you're able to afford to be able to travel to somewhere, or whether or not you get an whether or not you have access to an education program, or any of these different things, like any of these large, huge, your Googles and your Metas / Facebooks, whatever, like all these gigantic corporations, right? Like these tools impact millions of people, and yet the people that design and develop these tools, who are impacting, affecting millions of lives, they're held to a lower standard than a doctor or a lawyer who has an ethical standard and who makes the same kinds of significant life-altering decisions every day. But
students in the room listen to that.
Wait, what?
The students should listen to you.
Yeah.
They are going to become the technologists of the future.
Yes, exactly. When that, it is. I just find it's very striking that people like me in various roles that I've played in, either working at a startup in the past, whether working in the military, whether doing security consulting or whatever, I'm held to a lower standard, even though I have a larger impact. Just as much of a life and death impact in some instances, as a technologist with some of these tools and applications that affect, how political, how political discourse happens, how real or whether misinformation or disinformation gets spread. Like all these different things are algorithmically driven, and yet these algorithms that affect millions of people, that affect the entire world, are held to a lesser standard than a doctor who has a Hippocratic oath.
I have the impression now the data is cheap, processing power is cheap, we have machine learning, TensorFlow, just run it, and that companies are just using it a little bit blindly, just like, okay, we can access the data, we just run machine learning, we get a result, great, you get the funding for that. Without really thinking, why will it really impact business? Can they hold the ethical standards? Do we need to slow down?
Yeah, that is the assumption that it will be better. And it's very funny because we had the last 5 years of this hype and all of the papers on machine learning, and I'm seeing the papers that just come out, and there are papers like logistic regression is as good as deep learning, right? Now we're come back of it is not really better. Like all of this data doesn't really give you more. And this is the kind of thinking that people are not having. It's just better, it's more technology, more digitalized. It's also good PR sometimes. And indeed, it goes too fast and without, as Chelsea said, without much thinking.
Do we need slow food, slow technology? Like understand what you're doing more, think more about the user, the data, and all the problems.
I mean, yeah, that's the whole concept of engineering, is you think about these things. Like you don't go and just you don't just start putting bricks down on a bridge right before you build it. You plan out, you think about all of the feasibilities, assessments, all of these things like that. Unfortunately, it's like the way that machine learning and a lot of these algorithms are developed is it's just somebody who's just like, oh yeah, let's just put as many bricks here as possible and let's build a bridge as quickly as possible without thinking about any of these different things. And then of course, it's a rickety, collapsing structure that is barely held together and is dangerous to a lot of people because there was no forethought, there was no analysis, there was no testing, there was no sort of science behind developing this thing. And they just sort of threw bricks together and put some cables and threw it together.
And this is not to say that machine learning doesn't have enormous potential and there can be things, is that sometimes building too fast and for indiscriminate applications without thinking about it can lead to results that maybe is not the one that we socially would like.
Okay. I had an amazing conversation, but we have a lot of people in the audience, and I guess maybe some people have questions, and I would like to open now the space for wider discussion, if I can see something. So please think about a cool question. Raise your hand. We have microphones going around. So anybody would have a question? I see two, one there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Isham. I just came to say thank you very much for everything you did in the military, colleagues, and everything. Just my admiration to you, Chelsea.
Okay, question?
No. Well, a lot of questions, but I really wanted to say that. That's all for me for now.
Okay.
Thanks. There was one there.
Hello? I was just given a mic, so I don't know if I should speak now or later.
Please, of course.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
You have the talking wand.
Okay. So I'm Stepan Kovac from QRCrypto.ch, just here in the Innovation Park. And I have a remark regarding what you mentioned regarding Red Cross. I find it equally terrible as you do. But what I find even more terrible is that actually, I believe it was in September last year, we met actually with some Red Cross director, which I won't name, and I actually don't remember the name. And we proposed them to strongly encrypt their data. And they said, oh, okay, maybe we'll get back to you. If they had done it, it would have avoided that catastrophe. And well, they didn't do it. So this is a wake-up call to all organizations that hold sensitive data, whether about people or processes, intellectual property. Time to act is now. If you wait a little bit to know whether you want to encrypt or protect otherwise your data, it will be too late. Thank you.
Is there a question?
That's more of an affirmation because I believe that we very much align in, let's say, thinking that the strong encryption of data is needed now more than ever to be able to be protected. Obviously, it's not a silver bullet, but it's way better than having nothing, which is, unfortunately, and not because it's not possible, but because there is a lack of consciousness and will to do things properly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
A real question this time, please.
Merci.
We appreciate comments and thanks, but having a question. So
I will go forth. I think you talked about the problem you encounter with centralized databases. Hey.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, thank you. Right. You talked about a big problem with centralized databases, and as far as I'm reading, we're seeing a lot of countries in Europe trying to build this kind of big databases. I'm thinking of France with the Health Data Hub with Microsoft, and even Europe trying to figure out new ways of storing data, which for now looks to be going the direction of centralized databases. How do you see a change in the way we see centralized databases? Because as far as I see, we see companies still trying to centralize, we see governments trying to centralize, and the technology you're presenting tries to go decentralized. How do you see, I don't know, the power to shift from centralized to decentralized?
The cloud.
The cloud is the solution?
Yeah, like it seems that there's been a sort of incentivization from the last decade or so to put everything on the cloud, whether it's governments or universities or corporations.
Yeah, which is a kind of a convenience issue. It's like, how do we change this thing? Well, again, it needs the technology that needs to come, right? Technology that allows you to do this thing. And we have some technology that allows you to even build those databases in a more distributed way. Here, colleagues at EPFL, like their Professor Dubois, or there we have Professor Ford, have worked a lot on these kind of things, where, again, it's a question of putting more technology, and then it is how this is going to happen, how we're going to push. On the one hand, has to be regulation. On the other hand, has to be pressure to not build those databases, right? Like that was one of the things that allowed the contact tracing apps to move to the decentralized scale, was the big pressure from the public to say, we don't want the centralized one, right? Because there is a lot of power on the people. Like we forget that we have that, but sometimes we do.
Yeah, and I think that it is that certainly the shift to the cloud is mostly about the ability to sift through that information, use it for other purposes, to like sort of commodify that information or monitor that information in a different way. Not always for nefarious purposes, but it does create the risk, which is a huge problem of what is known in security as a single point of failure. So if you have all of your information on the cloud in your cloud account or your AWS server or your database or whatever it is, if you're a small or medium-sized organization, gets out there, then it completely is available and it all goes out all at once. Whereas like if you decentralize it, then you keep things sort of. The approach that I usually suggest to people from a security perspective is to move towards the edge computing, so to speak, which is where you essentially have a cloud, but you own it. It's in your secure bubble. It's on your network. It's within your control. And a company that specializes in cloud hosting makes these resources available, provides the expertise and everything. So it's essentially a sort of in-between. And I think that there's a lot more edge, like one of the new buzzwords within the cloud computing and hosting community is edge computing. So you're going to hear edge computing a lot. And I added the edge because it's edgy sounding.
Hi. So I just had the question that we as users, like knowing how tech services and work right now, what can we as users do to try to grasp our data, like to try to have some control over our data, being within this kind of use of these services?
Very little.
Yeah, I actually I have a different opinion, which is that I think that that what I do, I mean, I can just tell you what I do. There's a whole concept like threat modeling, which is to understand sort of what are your threats. Like, pay attention to like what information am I trying to hide? Am I trying to hide photos from my girlfriend or from my boyfriend or from my partner? Is my threat group an X? Is my threat group is it my boss? Is it my job? Is it the government? Am I a journalist or whoever I am? What information are you trying to keep private? Understand that. Identify who you're trying to keep it from. Understand that and how to do that, and just sort of build a model for yourself as to what your actual threats are. Because not everybody needs to be, worried about every single threat that they're worried about and every single different piece of information. I mean, I know that TikTok is not the greatest most secure app in the world. But I still use it. I am actively taking mitigating measures to use some of these social media services and whatnot in order for me to participate. Because I still want to participate in a social society, so I still have a Twitter. I still throw my useless thoughts and opinions and random thoughts out there in the world, and I still like watch random videos of cats and stuff on TikTok and weird art on TikTok with cool music, like 100 gecs, like split up 100 different ways. But I still consume this information. But I take precautions. I have it on a separate device. I have it on. I don't keep anything that's nearby to it. I'm aware of what I try to limit its access to the microphone and to other different things through an app like a phone or whatnot. So it's about understanding your sort of threat modeling. And threat modeling is a hard thing. It is a hard skill to learn. But I think everybody should be. I think threat modeling should be taught at the secondary school level. I really do. I think
agree.
It can. Wait, what?
I agree.
So I have a question.
Oui?
You both talked about how you could introduce a procedure that is like, for example, how you get out a vaccine, which is like much more controlled. But that seems sensible to me for example, for a big corporation or something like that. But for example, if I take an easy example, students like us want to create a new social media or something like that, how could you really impose that such a like harsh and long, difficult procedure is actually applied on anything like brought out?
I mean, I think there is a very different kind of scale, right? When we speak about digitalization, one of the things that makes it very different from anything before is the scale. When here Daniel was asking before about this leak of soldiers in Ukraine, one thing that makes it very different it was not a newspaper that just goes in the streets of Ukraine. It's that it goes on the internet, right? The scale is huge. And we need to distinguish very much the processes that we could put. If you guys want to build here at EPFL kind of a small network for EPFL people, maybe you don't need such procedures. Now, if we're going to build an app that is going to be thrust upon all of the users in the world, of the billions of users of an Apple device, then maybe at that point we do need a thing. And it may be the same, again, I'm not a pharma expert, so I don't talk about the processes, but we need to distinguish, and we cannot conflate both things, because then you get to the fallacy that, oh, we cannot put procedures anywhere. But it is very different, kind of the impact you can have, like what we were speaking before, is about think about the impact you're gonna have and how many people you're gonna have impact. You're just gonna do a little kind of thing on your Raspberry Pi to have a conversation with your flatmates, dude, do as you wish. But if you're going to put this on the market and now many people are going to use it, then maybe we need to think about the ethical implications and have a process about how we should actually deploy such technology.
Yeah. It's very well, I can't just thumbs up on that.
Hi. I have a question on the future of privacy technology in the segmented internet.
I just want to, I'm not trying to throw you off, but I see that your t-shirt says Bitcoin is dead.
We wish.
Every few weeks, yeah.
Yes. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to throw you off.
What do you think about the future of privacy in the segmented internet? And to extend the question, like the more you need privacy, the more it's a red flag to use something like Tor or Neem. So what do you think about this?
I'm not sure I get the question.
Yeah, can you rephrase that?
Like if you use Tor in Europe, nobody cares about you using Tor. Like your internet provider doesn't care about.
Oh, you mean getting shut down? Yeah, so, yeah. That's more of an infrastructure problem. So that's like if China blocks VPN access and things, right?
I mean,
that's
me as a user, can I use Neem in a super censored internet environment?
Oh yes, definitely. Like that's kind of the point. So yes, it is essentially to assume that every single nefarious actor that you can imagine out there exists and has extraordinary capabilities, and to try to mitigate all of your different means in terms of preventing censorship, in terms of preventing surveillance, in terms of preventing...
But I'm just immediately showing myself as doing something like either super illegal or counter...
Well, I mean, what is legal and illegal? Like, it depends on what part of society that you're in. Sometimes speaking against the government is illegal in your particular jurisdiction. Maybe that's a good thing, you know. And some people say that you know, that buying and selling of a recreational drug is illegal or illegal. You know, there are things that are moral and immoral and illegal and legal that different parts of different societies you know, are going to have trouble and problems with.
How do you protect the people who use these privacy tools?
So Tor, for instance, Tor does have mechanisms that allow you to use Tor while this use being invisible, right? So you connect to a machine that is actually in the Tor node, you modify the traffic. As far as I know, NIM is still not yet there, but we'll bring it there, right? Like there are a lot of these mechanisms, there is a lot of things. There are other tools actually for censorship countries that are not like Tor, and a lot of research that goes exactly into what you're saying. How can I allow people to use technology without the use of the technology being visible? Because indeed, sometimes actually just being a user can put you in danger. So that's a different part. And the network grows slowly, but towards there.
Hello, I had a question regarding the nodes for NIM. Can you explain how the people who maintain the nodes are rewarded and how it differs from Tor?
So the reward system is basically, in order to do calculations on the network, in order to make the mixnet work, some really intensive calculations have to be done. And so the nodes do a lot of these calculations, and in order for these calculations to be incentivized across the network and to make the network move faster, and to pay for the expenditure of setting up a node, you are essentially rewarded with sort of tokens, or like I call them like essentially the equivalent of a bus pass, right? It allows you or someone else to run large amounts of traffic across the network, and so it incentivizes people to be able to participate in the network. So, and it also balances the load of sort of things. It sort of discourages people from abusing that network and sort of using it to spam people with useless information and things. So it's a very different and very complex economy that's sort of been set up. But it is more like a public. It's more like a public service than a cryptocurrency sort of network. So it differs quite significantly than sort of like you hoard a bunch of tokens and you have more tokens, which makes you richer or whatever. Like no, it's like they have a very specific purpose and allows you to only do these certain things. But does that answer your question? Cool.
Hello, my name's Jeremy McTague. I would be very interested to know what your thoughts are on getting rid of anonymity on the internet.
Do you ever really? Do you ever really can you ever get rid of anonymity on the internet? And are you ever really anonymous on the internet? Those are totally fascinating philosophical questions, and I don't have an answer I frankly don't have an answer, because I don't think that anyone is truly anonymous, since if you are participating in the universe, not just society, not just on the online, but in the universe, like even if you are a hermit, like somebody can see the smoke coming from the fire that you started. So in theory, everybody can see you at all times. So I do think that anonymity is something that should be valued. I think that privacy should be valued. The question is as the number of cameras that we have, the number of surveillance means that we have, the number of means in which we can collect data points about every aspect of society, down to like how many times you hit your toaster and what time, gets collected. What does that mean for our society, and how do we value that, and it, like, is that an amount of anonymity that we want and value in our society? And the answer is I'm not a philosopher, and I think that's a philosophy question at this stage.
My answer is it's a very bad idea. Like, there is no, like the fact that we can have, maybe we don't have pure anonymity, as Chelsea said. It's actually a very good question. Are we ever anonymous or really not anonymous? But you still can be pseudonymous. You still have some capability to divide your identities in a way, the same thing that you do in the offline world, and choose to maybe not do things, maybe by using your incognito tab, or maybe, as Chelsea said, by buying another phone that I particularly use for a particular thing. And then, of course, that phone becomes my pseudonym for that part of my identity. But the capability of humans to be able to do that is actually what makes us free. The moment that we make the anonymity disappear, we're essentially kind of killing half of what society, or what the kind of society, at least I like to live in, the place in which we don't have freedom because everything is observed, right? There is a Black Mirror episode about it. There is a Black Mirror episode about everything. There is one about this.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, in which you have these points, right, in which, and if we could have a non-anonymous society online, and nowadays, like, we have been talking for hours now here about how society is purely digital, not having anonymity good means that you would enter in this kind of being recognized all the time, and then maybe get into these social points that we're going to become a completely different society. So
I have a question that I often ask myself. That's a philosophical one, whenever with respect to anonymity, and that is: are you ever really anonymous if you know who you yourself are?
I'm a computer scientist.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to float that one out there because that one's a real doozy.
Okay, hi. First, thanks for the interesting discussion. Coming to my question, we several times heard the key term decentralized, and basically we're currently kind of in the Web 2 era. So we had Web 1, where a lot of stuff was decentralized, basically just a bunch of nerds ran their own servers with maybe text-only websites, stuff like that. We're currently in Web 2, where a lot of services are centralized at Google, Meta, Microsoft, etc. And the future is supposed to be Web 3, which is supposed to be decentralized again.
Who makes these labels?
I mean,
I already thought we were in Web 3. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Web 4, that's the answer.
Okay, good. No, my point is Web 3 is supposed to be decentralized and blockchain-based and all those buzzwords, basically.
Yeah.
But in the current situation, a lot of those blockchain accesses, Web 3 accesses, are going through APIs of just a few providers, which basically makes it centralized again. Are you aware of those issues? And if yes, what is your opinion on those?
I cannot agree with this, but I would say there is a blog post from Moxie that I cannot repeat now, that is kind of the excellent read, and I would just let people go and read that thing because it just explained it perfectly. We don't need to kind of elaborate.
That was basically what I was referring to, which is why I came up with that question.
When I say decentralized, I sort of, unfortunately, I'm getting really, like, this is a Googleable term, if that's even a word itself, which is rhizomatic. I mean in the rhizomatic sense. Like, not necessarily in the...
What's rhizomatic?
It is, Google it.
Oh,
it's the lose, I think.
Okay.
Hi. Do you think a part of the solution could be use also of the open source tools, such as open source software and also open source hardware? For example, we should switch maybe to the operating systems that can be read and verified by everybody, or maybe even like a hardware switching from the Intel that possesses Intel Me chips towards something that is open source, such as RISC-V processors, etc.
RISC-V, all right, I got that part.
So my question back would be, if Google now would run on open software and would do exactly what they're doing right now, on open software, right? All of the code would be on GitHub. Would this change anything? Yeah, it could be very much verified that all our data is being used in ways that we don't want, right? So we need to distinguish these two things. From a security perspective, open source is extremely important, that we can check, that we can verify, that there are no bugs, that there are no problems. But open source and verification are not going to solve the problem when the application itself is doing something that maybe is non-desirable, because it can be verifiably non-desirable, right? So it's not that, indeed, open software and open hardware would actually, I think they could solve a lot of problems about IP and kind of domination of these companies maybe, but they could not solve some of the problems we have been talking about here, because that doesn't come from the fact that the software is private, but from the fact that the business model itself may actually be not what we want.
Yeah. I am personally a little bit excited about the prospect of open source hardware because it has been so difficult to obtain and to have. And I am excited about the fact that RISC-V International, which is currently based in Switzerland, offers an architecture that can be that allows people to not have to go to a giant corporation like ARM or NVIDIA or Intel to be able to design and develop chips and be able to essentially come up with processors or microprocessors, either central processors or microprocessors or graphics processors, and do all these different specific tasks, and allows people to have less who have less resources to be able to design, develop, and build tools and hardware that just like NIM would be interested in, is very interested in that in terms of like being able to design and develop things that allow for you to be able to control the amount of security and to control the amount of power consumption that a tool has when you're designing and developing it. Now, then from a security perspective, unfortunately, open source hardware doesn't always mean that the hardware that's produced, you always have a map of it. You just sort of have what the underlying architecture is open source. So I do want to clarify that point.
Hi, thank you very much for the speech. That was really interesting. I was wondering about privacy. Like, basically, like this big social media, like Facebook, Instagram, I mean, that's the same thing, but whatever. They're all like, there is not the market, like they are the only one, and they're only one doing whatever they want, and like government can enforce laws and whatever, but they can always find a way to go around that. And like, do you think there would be a way for government and like bigger entities to like help smaller and different actors to like create new medias that actually like take care about privacy and like help with the like keeping user private and like in a good shape and whatever, and yeah, that would be better than like pushing laws and like forcing entities to do something, but like rather developing the market, like helping other companies to go like and say, okay, I could try to be a competitor showing that I can help with privacy. Do you think there would be a way like that would be better than enforcing like GDPR laws or whatever, since they don't really work? Oh.
So the question is, can we help building competitors to the big tech that come from a better angle? And that's a very difficult question. I mean, and that's what we try to do, like what NIMS try to do, and we said before, like more and more examples need to exist to give people alternatives, right? Now it's very hard to give people an alternative when the privacy-invasive alternative is so good, right? Like, how do we build these things? And there needs to be a kind of a change of will. Indeed, there is a lot of funding needed because in the beginning, these companies may not be profitable by themselves because it is hard to find the market for these things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I don't have an answer. But what I do know for sure is that many of the corporations and the massive social media infrastructure that we have and the data collection services that we have are heavily incentivized as well by tax credits to, you know, or by, you know, jurisdictions to allow them to transfer data or in such a way that it, you know, they can get around certain laws and jurisdictions and things. I do think that there are similar mechanisms that can make the playing field more level in the future if certain jurisdictions allow for things like that. I know that I know that Switzerland in particular has sort of paved a little bit of a way for that to occur here, which is one of the reasons why NIM is here. So I think that it is possible to level the playing field, but I don't have a simple cut and dry answer.
The other week, I got into a fight on Reddit, an argument.
Uh-oh. All right,
that's your fault.
I know. Well, yeah, that's where
Let's
we're going.
go.
I ended up getting really upset, and I checked the comment history. I realized that I was arguing with a bot, like not a real person.
Happens.
But it
happens to the best of us.
But it had elicited an emotional reaction from me, a very strong emotional reaction, actually.
Yes.
And, I'm just wondering, is there in a world where bots can consistently pass the Turing test, I mean, what can be done to, you know, prevent or mitigate the proliferation of manipulative bots like that?
Yep.
What she said.
It's a very good question. The answer is, I mean, well, you know, it had, like that opens up a whole gambit of other questions, you know, and other things like that. And this is definitely that is a whole lecture and a whole question and debate session in and of itself. I would probably be spending like 45 minutes to an hour on that topic alone. But the simplest answer for the audience that we have here is that AI systems have gotten to a point where, you know, as pointed out with the Turing test, is that essentially where it becomes indistinguishable to a person interacting with it, whether or not you are talking with or not a machine. And that is a very good question, and I don't have an answer. And it quite alarms me that I can't make that distinction as well. And I and I work with this stuff every day. This is my bread and butter. This is how I get paid, and I have difficulty with that. What I will say is that as an AI person in general, I do think in general that we should be more aware of the future that we're going to have with AI, because I see some weird stuff happening with AI every day, and it does give me a little bit of that creepy woo feeling.
Stop watching Black Mirror.
It's worse than that.
Hi. So you touched on the subject of us having way too much information today. Instead of the problem being lack of information, now the problem is just like,
yes.
Rifling through this amount. And it's something I found extremely interesting because it's something I personally struggle with. It's this labeling of what is misinformation and what is actually true news, right? And originally, I thought that we as humans, as a collective, are more or less good at doing this, And then COVID came, and I found out that we're absolutely terrible at it, right?
Yep.
And my question is, now that there is, instead of COVID, like a common enemy where we're all on our side, there is Ukraine and Russia. So we know that there are actors that benefit a lot from creating, very convincing misinformation, right? And they have the means and the power to make it very good, right? How can we, defend ourselves against propaganda? What is, what do you use personally to, do this kind of labeling? Do you have a news source you trust more, or do you have a system that you can recommend us?
I have a personal answer, and it's an unfortunate one, which is that in order for me to get around misinformation and disinformation, I go to primary sources. I go and call someone up, and I ask them on the ground, what do they see? And I am trusting another person, a source that I verify over time, to tell me that information is true or untrue, which is a lot of resources, it is a lot of time, it is a lot of effort, and it is a lot of trust and things like that. So I think that it is very difficult and it's very expensive because one of the things that we created with mass media is we created this apparatus where we outsourced the filtering of our information. So in order for me to get the information that I need in order to trust it, I don't go to a filter, I go straight to the primary source, which is not available to everyone. I don't think you can just call most people up in random places.
I
thought you would have had a comment on that.
No. Your answer was very good.
I have a question. So we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, and we have all the infrastructure, Cogent, the internet is already here. And then, for example, we can talk about India. Facebook is extremely popular in India because it paid for the internet infrastructure.
Yes.
And there are some places where the infrastructure is not here, or we need to rebuild it. How can we make sure that privacy-friendly actors are part of the reconstruction?
That's what I'm trying to do. I mean, that's what we're trying to do in general. Like it's very difficult because we're not, like what I'm trying to do in particular is I'm trying not to develop a single tool or a specialized tool or series of things that works only in one region. This stuff should apply everywhere. Now, every culture and every system and every legal structure is going to be different. But the underlying infrastructure hasn't really changed all that much since the 1960s, like the actual code and the infrastructure itself. So I think that there are ways in which we can build a more universal structure. But the problem is that our society isn't universal. Like everybody has their different moral structures, their sort of views and things, whether it should be authoritarian or decentralized or whatnot. So I think it's very difficult. I think it's a very difficult question to answer. And yes, and certainly quote unquote developing regions have taking very different approaches than the United States and Western Europe towards building these building this infrastructure. It hasn't been universal, and I recognized this a long time ago, but it seems that Silicon Valley has failed to understand that different people would have different values and approaches to how information. That's how GDPR came to be in the first place, even though it's been undermined rapidly.
And I think kind of the underlying this answer is the question that this is not only a technological problem, right? It has been a decision of a government to decide to put infrastructure in the hands of these people. So it's not only a question of, again, we can build new infrastructure, we can put things on the field, but not all problems can be solved by technology. That's another very kind of important thing to think about as technologists, that we don't have in hand, like there is a lot of policy, there is a lot of economics, there is a lot of other things. And for answering this question, like how do you remove Facebook kind of from the core of India? Well, you need to then put another infrastructure. And this is not
which
about...
they did.
Yeah. But it's not about only what can be built. It doesn't matter what we build if they don't put it there, right? So we need also to discuss the socio-economic context together with the technology. Otherwise, we're just going to fail by building technologies that will never be successful.
Yeah.
Okay, we are way past our bedtime. So I'd like to first thank both of you. 2 more questions, short, really short, and then I think we should...
Petite.
Yeah, I try to keep it short. So I know we're in a technical environment, but we speak about people, we speak about society, we heard it very often. Usually social science are dealing with this. So I would just try to get a very short answer. Do you work with social scientists? And where do you see the future of social science in all this development?
Yes, every time I can, I do work with social scientists, or as we said, like with the bodies that we work with, like with ICRC, then we try to talk with the people on the field. Where I work with journalists, I talk with journalists, right? You need to talk with the people that are going to use these systems. Again, it's a similar response than before, like technology doesn't solve the problem if you don't really kind of embed it in a social environment. I think it's extremely important to take into account the input from social scientists and from people that come from disciplines that are not purely technical. Otherwise, again, we will build technology that will fail.
I would argue that data science is a social science.
Ooh.
Okay, one last question.
Yes, hello. I just have a small question about... I'm here.
Sorry, there you are.
I just have a small question about NIM. So as far as I understood, it would be a very sensitive application, like you aim to provide a secure channel to your customers. So in this context, how do you plan to deal with cyber attacks, with hacks? So do you already start to anticipate such things to happen?
Yeah, that is actually a focus of my security audit that I just wrote last year. Was focusing specifically on attacks on clients. So I have interest, and I'm trying to come up with ways in which to protect people who use the NIM network. I do have interest. You know, I am very focused on that area personally. I don't have any answers that are beyond the answers that occur with anything else on the internet or the network. But it is definitely something that for the NIM network in particular has been thought about at the infrastructure level. So we're thinking about the privacy and the security of people at all levels. And I don't know if you know the network architecture. Sort of, there's the physical layer, there's the application layer, whatnot. But to try to get every single step that's within the sort of layering process of that, and sort of sort of ensure that that these kinds of attacks are mitigated by the infrastructure itself at the infrastructure layer. Now then, you know, will it work? I don't know.
Okay, thanks so much. It was way too, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the audience for so many questions. It's because of you we're late, but it's great. Thanks so much, Carmela and Chelsea, for taking so much time to answer all these questions. It's way too much to summarize. My take-home message for me is slow engineering. Think more about the application you're doing. Don't go for just the easy data analysis. Think about the impacts, and there's just too much to summarize. Thanks so much, Chelsea.
Merci.
Thank you.